Welcome to IIBA Brussels Chapter. Today we want to introduce you into the circular economy and environmental friendly analysis. First of all, I would like to thank our sponsor, Quaso Services. And today we welcome Michael Boyle. Michael has a number of years of experience within the business analysis domain. He was part of the original group that established the IIBA Austria chapter and was the second certified CBAP in the Allied Republic. His activities today are primarily with the circular economy and community activism area. And Michael also hosts a radio show on local Austrian public radio, where his focus is on empowerment, inclusiveness, and social transformation. And his efforts for 2021 include the establishment of the 15-minute city concept for a particular district in Vienna. In case you have any further questions on the subject of today, we will make some time at the end of the presentation where Michael will be so kind to give you any answers. So please do put any questions you might have in the chat that you will see. Michael, the floor is yours.
Okay, excellent, Christoph. Thank you very much. Let me get my mouse in order here. And before we actually go ahead and start with the festivities, I'd like to go ahead and, sorry, one second. Let's do this one more time. I'd like to go ahead and have you fill out some questions, only two. I would ask you to go to the URL to be found at the top of the screen, menti.com, and use the code 55117401. And I'd like you to go ahead and answer the question, where are you joining us from?
That's 55117401.
Correct. That one's unmistakable. Belgium, Lisbon. Bulgaria, Romania, England. Okay. Germany. Toronto, Canada,
Okay,
sorry.
welcome.
Slovakia, Austria, Qatar, Amsterdam, Saudi Arabia.
I also see in the chat we have South Africa, Red Deer, Alberta, Canada.
All right, South Africa, yes, Botswana.
Mm-hmm.
I keep getting ready to go ahead and say thank you very much, but then the screen keeps changing, so I want to make sure that everybody has an opportunity.
Yeah. We have now 39 attendees, so we have 19 answers so far.
Maybe start counting 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We went into up. See, I told you. I knew we would come up with something else. Excellent. Thank you very much. We have one more question we'd like to go ahead and move on to. So let me go ahead and go to that. One second. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so the question is, what is your knowledge of the circular economy? And you have three choices. One is you know nothing. The second one would be somewhat familiar. And then the last one, you consider yourself to be very knowledgeable. Okay, this one will be very interesting as well for me. Know nothing, okay. The suspense is mounting.
I do see some chat messages also. Nothing. You can just go to the www.menti.com using the code which is shown now on the screen 55117401, where you can enter your answers as well.
We'll give you one more chance. Okay, I tend to think that that is as good as we're going to get. So it's quite interesting that half of the populace know nothing about it. And so Christoph already gave me the prompt that it would be good to spend some time going more into detail about the circular economy. So I feel confident in saying that the majority of you who have decided to attend this webinar, that I'll make sure that, see, we got one more, or we got two more actually. So that will make sure that your needs are covered. Oh, like I said, Christoph, I'm ready to go ahead and say that was enough, and then the screen starts moving again. But I think that's, the score is quite representative. So thank you very much for that. Very good. So I would say, let's go ahead and move on to the agenda. So I will try to describe to you what the circular economy is about in a way that it is understandable, but try to be somewhat comprehensive. So that will be the challenge, but I will let you be the to be the ones to decide to what degree. I hit that one on the mark. And the key, of course, for today is not just talking about the circular economy, but showing how the tasks and the capabilities required of a business analyst fall in quite well for some of the tasks that need to be done within the circular economy. And for me, it was very important to give people perspective, especially understanding that this is a very hot topic. There's a lot of money that's coming out of Brussels, specifically tied to fostering the circular economy. I will talk a little bit about that. And if we can go ahead and provide perspectives for business analyst professionals, then I think we're doing something good. I will give you some tips on how you could actually go ahead and lean into that sector. And then, of course, we will leave the stage open for questions and answers. So as I mentioned, the circular economy is a hot topic in Brussels. I suspect that some of you have heard of the Green New Deal. And to add some facts to that, you could see the URL to be found in the lower part of the screen. Of the 750 billion euros that have been earmarked for growth to sustain the countries tied to the pandemic, primarily 30% of that is earmarked towards circular economy endeavors. So many of the things that we'll be talking about will be covered in my description, plus a little bit more. But we're talking about a fair amount of money. And of course, if indeed, and I don't think that you're that unique. I run across this often enough. Perhaps I live in a bubble where I think everybody knows about the circular economy. And then I realize that no, not everybody does. So this is a great opportunity to go ahead and try to explain the subject to a group that maybe might not be so familiar, and to test that we're really getting the message across. You might be familiar with this model. Now, you might not necessarily look at this as being the circular economy, but this has everything to do with the circular economy. This is the way that we do things today. We take from nature and we don't give back. We make things that people sometimes need, often enough they don't need, and we call that growth. And at the end, what do? We actually go ahead and throw these things away. So the real question, this is called the linear model. The question that we've been posing for a number of years is whether this model is sustainable. And of course, the idea is, how do we go ahead and bring things back to where they started. In other words, if we're taking from nature, how do we go ahead and replenish nature? And that will really pretty much be the focus of what I'll be talking about. But before we go into some of these points, I'd like to go ahead and talk about something that perhaps some of you might have seen before. This is coming from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. It's called the butterfly diagram. And I know that all of these symbols on the screen become very imposing, and I know for myself that when I first was confronted with the butterfly diagrams, that where do I actually start? So my goal here is to make this as simple as possible. I'm going to go ahead and see to what degree this works. There are two parts that we're concentrating on within the butterfly diagram. There are the technical cycles and the biological cycle. So I'm going to quickly run through these two parts. Let me see. This is the first time I'm doing this one. Can I erase it? Yeah, that works so well. So let's go ahead and start with the technical cycles here. The one that we know quite well, and certainly all of you that have been raised in Europe were more or less weaned on this idea of recycling. And we were told the whole time that recycling is good and we're doing our part for the environment. And we realized that actually recycling was kind of like putting a lipstick on a pig, because it really didn't solve the problem. It gave people a good, that feel good spirit. And in essence, it didn't really solve the problem. We see it's clearly tied to global warming, but global warming is just an effect. So it's better than nothing. It's certainly better than a landfill, but it should not be that of what we're striving for. So let's go ahead and take a look at the next component. In fact, what I'm going to do is go to the next screen. Let's see how this one works. We can get out of this. There we go. Nope. Apologies for that. Let's try this. Oh, there we go. All right. This is a little bit easier to read. So we move on from the recycling over on the right-hand side, and then we continue on to refurbish or manufacturing. So let's say that whatever you've been using, it's still usable, it's not in the best condition. Our society has moved in a direction that we think that it's always better to just go ahead and get something new, probably because it's much cheaper to go ahead and follow that path instead of actually going ahead and repairing what you're actually using. But it's not necessarily environmentally friendly. So we say that the refurbishment or remanufacturing is something much better than actually going ahead and recycling. Let me go ahead and give you a brief description of the two words. Refurbish means that we are able to repair it in a way that it's it's almost like new, but it's not quite new. Remanufacturing means that you're pretty much ending up with a new product. But of course, the resources that we use to actually go ahead and perform the remanufacturing certainly eliminates much of the CO2 that is to be derived from new materials. Let's continue. I talked about, oh, sorry, let's move on to reuse or redistribute. So if I don't need it anymore, if I pass it on to somebody who can use it, obviously we're extending the shelf life of the product per se. Maintaining and prolonging is another element that we concentrate on. And then eventually we've tapped into the entire life cycle of that product. Now, that is one way of looking at it. And you might have noticed in all of those components that I talked about, we're talking about something that people actually make. And is that the only thing that we can really rely upon? Well, of course not. We have those things that are coming directly from nature, which we call the biological cycles. And within the biological cycles, just to give you one obvious example, something that you are constantly being confronted with daily within the newspapers, the idea of moving away from fossil fuels and concentrating on renewables. And so obviously solar or wind would fall clearly into this biological cycle. And the idea is that we're able to go ahead and return directly to nature as much as we can from that of what we actually go ahead and take from it. And of course, those things that we consume. So this is the basic tenet of what we're talking about with the circular economy, but now I like to go ahead and take a little bit of a different route, one that we don't really talk about within the circular economy realm, not that much at least. One of the biggest problems, what you might have noticed in that butterfly diagram that I showed you, that we're concentrating primarily on what happens at the end. And for those of you who are business analysts, I think you're going to understand this concept. Input, process, output. I mean, that's a basic concept that we have within business analysis. So I ask you the question, if we have substandard input, what is the chances of us having substandard output? And I bet you can think of all kinds of examples of what's actually taking place in your day-to-day work. Look at data. Miserable data leads to inconclusive results at the end, or very misleading or dangerous results. And so one of the biggest problems that we have in our society is that we keep concentrating on the waste. That's way too late. And so there's a concept that we use within the circular economy parlance is called end of pipe. And you could see it exactly in this picture. You see the end of pipe, and that's where it ends up. That is way too late. And so the message I like to go ahead and pass on to you today is that as being a business analyst and putting on your BA hat, understanding that we need to go ahead and solve this problem earlier, and that will be the concentration of this webinar. Another concept that I think we don't talk about enough within the circular economy world is trying to make sure that we restore instead of degrade. And we know that under that model that we were talking about earlier, the linear model, the take, make, dispose, that is complete degradation, because at the end, we just go ahead and throw things away. We need to come up with models that allow us to restore back to nature. And that is really what we're talking about here. Now, the last part that we, again, where I think we're really lacking within the circular economy world, is this this idea of economy. Why do we use the word economy in circular economy? Well, if we're trying to go ahead and create incentives for people, then there has to be some sort of economic incentives. And I thought long and hard, can I come up with an easy path to make this a little bit more understandable for people? And how do we go ahead and improve in our situation? And I came up with these 3 points. This is what I've observed from human nature. The first one is awareness, because people don't really know what they're doing. They just go ahead and perform what they always do. We're creatures of habit. We really don't have the time to go ahead and concentrate on our daily processes to really understand what kind of damage we're causing. And I'm going to go ahead and tell you a personal story, because I was probably one of the biggest, not the biggest sinner, but I thought I was living a sustainable life. And I had somebody within the community just talking very what's the word I'm looking for? The off the top, matter of fact. That's the word I was looking for. Matter of fact, about ways that you could do things. And I started thinking about my own processes and what I was doing, and I realized that my life, the way I was doing things, was not as sustainable as I thought. And so for me, what I try to do quite often is show people, not in a way that you are a sinner, but rather, hey, you know what? There are other ways that we could do it. And if people are suddenly made aware of some of the things that they're doing where they think they're living sustainable and they're not, then they think, oh my gosh, well, maybe I have to do something about it. Because where do changes take place? They do not take place here. They take place here in the solar plexus. So you want to get people to feel the need to change. So that's why I always concentrate on this awareness part. And then we move on from awareness. So you say, you are aware. Congratulations. What do you do now? I said, I have no idea. So that's usually the response that I get. So what people need are some sort of instructions, kind of like a how-to manual, at least for the beginning, so they can take that situation and try to improve on it. But it's great that we have awareness. Fantastic. We were able to give them instructions, but what is the chance of it actually sticking? And this is where that economy part of the circular economy comes through, because if we're not able to go ahead and create incentives within this model this improved model we're trying to put together, then it will not stick. So we need to make sure that everybody's able to get something out of it, so that it just kind of happens that this economy, the circular economy, is something that everybody wants to do. It's in their interest, and we just go ahead and improve, getting back to the teeter-totter, where we work on the restorative and we move away from the degradation. So that was my explanation of the circular economy. If anything was unclear, I know that Christoph is manning the chat box, and we'll go ahead and take that on a little bit later on. But I'd like to talk to you about a project that I've been working on, and use this as kind of like a case study to show what kind of business analysis capabilities really do help in coming up with good solutions for the circular economy. And this project I was working on is coming out of North Carolina, and the sponsor is called the Circular Triangle. And the Circular Triangle is in North Carolina, and it's representing 3 counties where you have 3 universities, Durham, Wake, and Orange counties in North Carolina. And I hold a number of live streams, and I had I did a live stream in December. It was covering circular cities in the United States, and the representative of Circular Triangle actually joined, and we started the conversation. And one of the oh, sorry, I already jumped the gun. This is basically what it looks like on the map. You see Durham County, and then we have Chapel Hill. Hillsborough is also part of this area, and Raleigh is as well. Fair amount populations with is going to be around 4.5 million people. Now probably closer to 4. So it's a fair sized group. And one of the problems that they have is that they were not able to go ahead and define the entire flow of the materials to make sure that the problem's solved upstream instead of waiting until we get downstream. So I started playing around with some models, and this is the first one I started with. So let me go ahead and describe to you what you're looking on your screen right now. Starting at the top. We have 3 components that I concentrate on. One is energy, the second one is water, and the last one is goods or material goods. So if we're living, and of course the emblem in the bottom of the screen is supposed to represent a city. So we're either importing these elements into the city, or we're producing them locally. So if we're producing them locally, some parts might end up being exported, some will stay in the city. So the composite would be coming from our imports and those things that we produce locally. That would be the composite of what was actually being consumed in the area. So of course, we import it. There's CO2 that's being produced through that process as well. We go ahead and perform the consumption, and then after that, so what happens to what's left over? It either ends up as being local waste, or the waste is exported. And I think it's important to look at it from all 3 perspectives, because very often we'll just go ahead and concentrate on the material goods, but there is so much waste taking place in the other parts. The most obvious one is emissions that would be tied to energy using fossil fuels. And that's one that we have a lot of data on. Where we have less data is the pollution that actually ends into the water stream, because of course, if you could imagine following this path, so we've gone ahead and had some sort of pollution that's taking place upstream. Of course, it continues throughout the entire chain. That means everybody gets to profit from this pollution throughout the entire chain. And so I started looking at the problem from this perspective. And I started to realize that there is a notation for a material flow analysis. Now, I know this is a little bit complicated, but if you take a step back and start looking at it, it's not that complicated. And this was even before I realized that this model exists. So you see on the top, we have import and export. We understand this: import, process, output. And then we have our domestic extraction. So that, again, this was probably maybe a little bit more of a coincidence, but I'll leave that to the pundits. We have the material that we're importing, and we have the material that we're actually producing locally. And then you could see within that middle bar going through the screen, we have our process materials, and then they would be used for energy, or for emissions, and then we have the material use going into stock, and then depending upon what the actual chain is. For lay people, I still think this is somewhat confusing, although I think for business analysts, if you're familiar with technical models, you probably do pretty good on this. But this one might be a little bit more easier to understand. So let's start with those elements to be found over on the left-hand side. We have the number of households. This is actually coming from Charlotte, which has made a tremendous effort to become a circular city, also a town in North Carolina. And you could see the breakdown here that we have our households, and then we have our commercial, and then even then it's broken down quite a bit. They signaled construction because construction is actually a big emitter of waste. I would say about 25% of all waste is coming out of construction, and it's going straight into landfill, and then anything that's coming out of the public sector. So you could see here on the screen the total waste being created by, and this is a yearly figure, of course, total waste created by Charlotte is 1,064,063 tons of waste. And let's go ahead and continue moving forward from left to right. Now we're in the middle over on the right-hand side where the different types of waste are actually listed. We have plastics, textiles, metals, glass, et cetera, and I'm not quite sure. Let's see if this works. If I can move this over so I can read the whole thing. Yeah, great. And this is where it gets really interesting. We have the list of all the components that are to be found in that waste. Now, what's happening? Let's go ahead and take a look at everything to be found over on the far right-hand side. Of that million plus, 66,354 tons are ending up in recycling. Remember what we said from the butterfly diagram? Recycling is better than landfill, but it's not that much better. And then we have composting. So we're taking the, primarily, I think they're going to be coming from trees, the shrubs that are ending up in composting. I don't think that food waste is ending up there. It's not listed here, but that based upon some research I've done in the area, I don't think there is much taking place on food waste. And looky here, where does most of it go? It ends up in a landfill. So there is all kinds of room for improvement within this model. But if you understand that anything we are able to go ahead and solve upstream, that means before it even gets to waste, make sure that it never gets to this serious problem that we have. Now, this is where it starts getting interesting. Some of the challenges I've had, and we're far from done on this quest. So they asked me if I can try to put together a material flow analysis. And so I had 3 counties, and you have the differentiation between county waste and city waste. And of course, if you're coming from Europe and you think that this is the way it's managed, it's a real eye opener. First of all, I realized that they only really concentrate on what ends up in the landfill, and they don't think anything about it. It's not to say that we don't have landfills here in Europe. I can speak for Austria. I wouldn't be able to speak for any other countries. We still have, throughout all of Austria, 20% is still ending up in landfill. Now, the city of Vienna claims that most of that is going from the provinces, but that would be typical of the city of Vienna to make such claims. But in the States, there's so much land and they don't really think about it, and it seems to be the cheaper option. The only thing they really think about it is landfill. That would be number one. If you think about the model, let's go back here. If we think about, I'm going to go back here actually. If I think about what's taking place upstream, before it even is produced, or let's say it's actually been produced and is brought into my environment, that if I'm not able to go ahead and control the contents to be found at that level, then it makes it very difficult to actually go ahead and make sure that it doesn't end up in waste. I'm going to give you a brief description of one of the problems that we have. We have, if looking at it from a supply chain perspective, we either have, or from a manufacturing perspective, we either have primary resources or we have secondary resources. And for the most part, and this is a very general description, primary resources are going to be coming pretty much from nature, which means that perhaps you might not be able to go ahead and make sure that all of that is biodegradable, but it's easy enough to manage. But the real problem is when we start working with secondary resources, and virtually anything that we produce is made up of secondary resources. If you think about when you try to throw paper away, um, that very often it will have like a plastic lining. Well, how are you supposed to even go ahead and recycle that? Because that means you need to go ahead and pull those components away from each other, which makes the exercise extremely difficult. And you know what they do? I'm firmly convinced, although they don't go ahead and freely admit this. You know what they end up doing with that? They just burn it and they say, oh, okay, well, we were able to use it for energy. Fantastic. What's the cost of actually going ahead and producing energy and burning our trash? But of course, we've lived a long time, and here I'm speaking from Vienna, where we thought that was a good solution, and we continue with that. So let's go back to my challenges. Nobody had any information upstream, but of course, I've realized that the North Carolinians are not the exception here. That I have some serious issues here in Vienna and trying to determine. So what is the stuff that we're getting upstream? Because if we really want to solve this problem, we need to start looking up there. And of course, the elephant in the room is that you have departments, you have private industry that's responsible for taking care of the waste. And here's a factoid for you. This is coming from 2019 for the United States. The waste industry represents $1.5 billion. Now, I ask you a question. If that's your business, are you going to go ahead and say, no, I don't need to anymore, and I want to get rid of waste? They thrive on waste, and so we need to come up with solutions. So these are some of the problems that we need to deal with, and certainly some of the ones that I deal with quite often. And so I started thinking, doesn't this all have something to do with business analysis? I could think of examples in previous lives where I was doing a lot of this type of work, but it wasn't necessarily related to the circular economy. So the first one I'd like to go ahead and start with is a stakeholder analysis. Now, again, for all of you BAs out there, you know that when you come up with a stakeholder list, that we're going to have different types of stakeholders. We'll have our primary and our secondary stakeholders, and we will have different needs coming from the stakeholders that very often could be in conflict. Well, you could imagine in this story that I've been telling you, it's exactly the same situation. So if you're ever going to try to improve something and understand their needs and eventually get them to that model that I talked about earlier, awareness, instructions, and incentives, then you need to know your stakeholders. So, and I've realized through time that we within the business analysis world don't give ourselves enough credit in the talent that's required to go ahead and properly manage our stakeholders, because it doesn't matter where I run across, people can't do that. So that's really important. And that would be clearly something that's needed in virtually every circular economy project, whatever form it may be. And of course, in the one that I've been talking about, this is clearly following the concepts of data analytics. So if you look at the content to be found on your screen, I think if you're working with data, then this is nothing new. And in fact, this information, the stuff I'm showing to you on the screen right now, is coming from a publication that came from the IIBA. I believe they did it with Deloitte, if I'm not mistaken. Somebody might be able to keep me honest on that one. But you could see some things that are quite clear, and I'll go ahead and relate this to the project that I've been working on. So first of all, I have to obtain the data. So Does anybody have the data? That would be problem number two. How reliable is the data? Uh, what does the data set look like? This is one of the key elements. So if let's assume I have the three counties plus I have major cities. And of course, you never know whether that data has been aggregated from the city level onto the county level. That's another problem. And nobody can answer the question. So you need to go ahead and really look at the data beforehand to understand what these data sets are. And what I know I'll have to do is come up with a common data set that I could use using all of these sources. And then, of course, once I've come up with a common data set, then I can start scrubbing the data and making sure that there's a certain consistency. And of course, all of you who've worked with data analytics understand exactly this problem, because there's always simple stuff like formats, or that they use a different type of metric. For example, if the big one that we always run across, if you're dealing with data out of the United States and dealing with data pretty much out of the rest of the world, that the United States will be using their typical metrics. And of course, the rest of the world will be using something else. And so let's assume that we've come up with a common data set using the disparate data. Congratulations. Then we start going ahead and exploring this data and understanding what are our findings from this data. And then after we've been able to perform that exploration, then we can start going ahead and setting up new models based upon this data that we're getting to better understand how can we use this data to actually go ahead and solve our problem, which would be the interpretation part. Again, I am just going ahead and taking data straight out of this report that came from the IIBA and Deloitte. And I think for those of you who are into business analysis hardcore and certainly following the path that is to be found within the BABAC, you will recognize a lot of these components. I won't go into super detail here because I think that you're familiar with, say, for example, number one, requirements gathering, stakeholder engagement, perform the elicitation, continue on, et cetera, et cetera. Then we need to go ahead and, based upon what that data set is going to be looking like, as I mentioned, then figuring out what the documentation is going to be, putting together some sort of validation process, et cetera. Looking at the data, that which would be number three, and then we need to figure out some way to, if indeed we need to make some changes, some additions, or maybe some adjustments. Adjustments is the word I'm looking for. Within those data sets, we can't ruin the historical. So we'll need to go ahead and keep the historical data in some sort of pure form pre our data set, so that indeed, if there's a change to the data set, that we can go ahead and augment our new data set with the historical data. That would be a clean way of actually managing it. There might be some changes to the data that you're receiving from your source. If you're dealing with data analytics, you're familiar with all these problems. And so if you look at this project that I'm working on, and I think that we have a whole slew of different projects tied to circular economy here in Europe, where exactly this type of activity needs to be performed, then you see an opportunity. And then apart from some of this that I've been talking about, what if we think about the simple stuff when we talk about stakeholders? And Christoph mentioned a project that I'm working on where clearly I need to pull out some of my business analysis bag of tricks, where I'm trying to create a movement within the city where we're able to go ahead and revitalize the main streets in certain parts of Vienna, and kind of determine, so what are those essential things? That means I need to go ahead and come up with a stakeholder map, and I need to go ahead and find representatives of the different stakeholders and find out what those essential needs are. So if you're willing to go ahead and explore it a little bit, this concept of what's really required in the circular economy, once we've gotten past this definition part, you will realize that a lot of the things that you are probably already doing today are clearly needed. But of course, one of the problems that we always have, apart from the fact that we don't do a very good job of explaining what the circular economy is about. But most people, and this is one, and I think please feel free to push back on this. And I've been involved in BA work for a long time. I didn't plan this, so this is, I'm freestyling now. And I mentioned I was one of the founders of, or actually Christoph mentioned, I was one of the founders of the IIBA chapter here in Vienna. And back then, I really struggled in explaining exactly what a BA is. Now, I'd like to think 10 years later, that we're a little bit better, but I still think we do a very poor job of explaining all of what we do. And if you think about it, being in projects, inevitably we're the ones that are supposed to do all the legwork for a project manager. And probably you're taking on both roles like I did for a number of years. But if people don't know what you do, then they're not going to think of you when they need help. So my suggestion to all of you, if you're interested in actually getting involved in this type of work, and I think that you clearly have the skill set to actually go ahead and make a difference, then what you need to do is find out what their needs are. This would be my suggestion. Find out what their needs are. Similar to what I've been talking about within this project that I'm working on. Find out what their needs are. Think about your skill sets, and you need to go ahead and map their needs to your skill set, and you need to draw a clear line from one to the next, so that it's clear as silk that you are the one who's going to actually go ahead and provide value that the others can't. And if that's one piece of advice that I can go ahead and provide to all of you, it would be perform your due diligence, understand what are the real needs, get past this idea of the circular economy and all this there are a lot of people, there are enough charlatans out there as well, because there's plenty of money to be made, but really get down to the nuts and bolts and understand what are the real needs, and figure out what would be the best way for you to actually go ahead and jump into that. And I will go ahead and make an offer to all of you. If indeed you would like to go ahead and continue that conversation and better understanding how your needs could be maybe transposed into some of these types of projects, please feel free to go ahead and reach out to me. And I mean that. Okay, I didn't take the time, but I talked a long time. Apologies for that. So, but we still have some time for questions. So Christoph, I don't know, did we get any questions?
We got a couple of questions, we did, but if you want to pose another questions to Michael, feel free to post them in the chat. Stefan Kostin-Boka, he was referring to the awareness. He said that he recently learned that efforts to separate waste might be in the end in vain. For example, if you take a bottle of wine, so a wine bottle, and if you don't remove the lid and all the labels, that bottle is going to end up in a landfill.
That's a great example, Stefan. Thank you for that. And that goes back to what I was talking about earlier, tied to primary resources and secondary resources. And if we go ahead and put all these things together, and it becomes so difficult for us to go ahead and remove it, then the easiest solution is to go ahead and throw it into the landfill. But we all know better if we have good design at the beginning of the process, knowing full well at the end, all of this should be easily separate, then we would make sure that we didn't have that problem, right? So that for me, what the situation you just described is a design problem. So let's make sure that we understand, one, where the problem starts. Secondly, where do we need to go ahead and make the changes? And this is clearly upstream, and make sure that it's done, and hold the people accountable who are going ahead and creating this mess upstream, and not saying, oh, I'm sorry that you have all this trash now. So thanks for that question, Stefan.
Okay, thank you. Irina, she is questioning, and the product of construction material is included.
Yes.
So you have the famous, and now she's challenging me with some chemical stuff. So
Okay.
the famous calcium carbonate, which will make the calcium oxide and the carbon dioxide.
I would not be able to go ahead and speak directly about those components because it's something that it falls outside of my expertise. But what I can do is explain some things that are tied to the construction processes that clearly lead to the problem that we're running across today. And in fact, here's another factoid for you that 40%, 40, of all those elements that end up in landfill are coming from construction. And you know what the problem is? The problem is that when we're finished with a building, we blow it up. Meaning that everything that was from the previous building becomes trash. That means we don't try to extract any of the material to be found in that old building. We go ahead and blow it up, and then we take it to the landfill. So that, if you ask me, there might be some issues tied to chemicals, but if you look at that 40% damage that's caused going straight to the landfill, I would say that's the bigger problem. So where do we go ahead and approach it? Well, then this is another design problem, because if you cannot disassemble a building, then it's a little bit difficult. Then it's similar to the situation that Stefan was talking about. What's left? You have to send it to the landfill. So create the buildings in a way that it could actually be disassembled. And in fact, you could even come up with a business case by following that, because you can come up with you can prefabricate in a sustainable way. You can prefabricate a lot of these components earlier. You could construct them in a way that if you need to make alterations to the building, well, that was already part of your model. And then lastly, when you're done with the building as it is, you could actually disassemble it, move it somewhere else. You could actually go ahead and build it in a way that you can easily remove parts. So it's like repairing the building, but that it's all tied to design. And that means that we really need to go ahead and solve these issues upstream. And in fact, the issue of construction is really an interesting one, and it makes me very angry. And there's one last thing I'd like to go ahead and say about the construction. We talk about the materials, and we say that it ends up in the landfill. Have we ever tried to quantify the actual value of the material to be found in the building? It's actually quite interesting when you follow that approach. And in fact, there's a big movement right now tied to what's called urban mining. And urban mining is basically comprised of understanding the actual components to be found in your building, with the intention of understanding, well, that there's value in that. And why don't we go ahead, instead of just throwing it in the landfill, let's go ahead and try to extract the value from that building. It's just looking at materials alone, that it's actually very, very valuable. So there are a lot of things that we can do right now to go ahead and solve the problem. Uh, and for me, again, this is another design problem. I'm afraid I didn't directly answer your question, but I'm hoping that maybe through highlighting a few things tied to the problems with the construction industry and the processes, that maybe you would find some added value there.
Okay, thank you. We have another question, and keep your questions coming so Michael can answer them. We have a question from Tejas Sri Prasad. So the stakeholder analysis is to remove the impediments. So for waste is the most important parts.
Oh, the stakeholder analysis is for so many different parts. This is the one I run across quite often. And for those of you who work in corporations, none of this is going to surprise you. Let's stay with the example of the construction. So you have different touch points in the construction. Of course, you have your resource extraction. You have your preparation of the resources per se. You have the actual components to be falling into the building, and so on and so forth. But if you look at the supply chain, if you look at the processes, A doesn't talk to B, doesn't talk to C, doesn't talk to D, and at the end, the person who's responsible for detonating the building just has a job, and that person's not going to go ahead and question all the motives of all the other stakeholders. So if we are able to understand by coming up with a list of all of our stakeholders and understanding that we should have one goal, and that is to be sustainable, then you would be able to bring all of those stakeholders get together in some fashion and in figuring out ways to actually hold them accountable to the overall goal, which would be the sustainability. There was I can give you an example of a technique that that I use out of business analysis that would be quite beneficial, and that would be the CBAP model. So supplier, input, process, output, customer. And if we were to go ahead and superimpose a CBAP model into that of what I was talking about tied to construction, so the supplier would be the resources, the input would be everything getting ready to make the building, the process would be the building per se, the output would be the building, the finished building, and then the customer gets the building. If we were to transpose that into the corporate world, I think I could probably do a complete hackathon on that subject. That how many times have you run across a situation where somebody upstream has no clue of what's being done with their material? And I'm thinking about simple processes within a company where, say, for example, the input is data, the output is a document, and the customer throws it away. And or the input is data, the process is a document, and the customer ends up fixing the errors to be found in the document. So where's the real problem here, folks? That all these people do not realize they're working with one process, and that everybody has something at stake in the entire process and making sure that there is no waste. So let's go ahead and take a look at this idea of putting together a stakeholder analysis and understanding what the whole end-to-end process is. That's the material flow analysis, and making sure that each stakeholder group understands not only what's taking place before them and afterwards, but understanding that it's all about the end goal and making sure that they're held accountable in some fashion. So for me, stakeholder analysis is really key to ever solving this problem, much more than just awareness. But you would have to fill in the other points, uh, uh, parts of the equation as well, that you would need to give them clear instruction. You would have to set up new processes because obviously the old processes weren't actually working. And you would need to build incentives so that they would want to go ahead and hold to these new processes you set up, right?
Mhm. Thank you. We have another question from Thierry Tenet. Is it to all BA to raise and integrate the requirements for circular economy in their projects, or is it to specific BA experts in circular economy to focus on this matter?
Yeah, then we have to go back to the definition. What is circular economy? Actually, the circular economy is this meta concept that applies to a bunch of different elements. So let's go ahead and dig deeper as to what you're actually trying to accomplish. In fact, we can go ahead and stay with this material flow analysis. The Without knowing some of the details to be found within what's taking place in the material flow analysis, I would say that I feel confident in that I'm qualified to go ahead and perform the exercise. That means you need to understand what you're looking at, and of course, a BA needs to learn very quickly and jump into the assignment, and that's something that I've always had to do as well. So that's quite normal. Uh, Understanding exactly what needs to be done and getting back to what I was saying earlier, that it's really I would get past this idea of circular economy, understand exactly what the project does the project, and understanding how do we go ahead and eliminate waste. So then you would need to go ahead and define, so what is required to go ahead and actually accomplish that goal. Is it a case of understanding the end-to-end workflow, understanding how we need to go ahead and change things upstream? Or is it stakeholder behavior? We need to go ahead and define what it is. Now, I don't know about you, but I look at all of those things as being BA duties. So the real question is trying to understand, getting back to what I said earlier, I think you're going to have to probably spend a fair amount of time beforehand understanding what are they trying to accomplish and break down all the marketing, understanding what the clear tasks are that they need to have accomplished, and understanding your own skill set and where you think you could bring added value. So I wouldn't concentrate so much about this circular economy thing. I would concentrate more about the actual project that are clearly tied to this concept of circular economy and what you could actually bring to the table. That's where I would start.
Okay, thank you. I have another question from Irina. Can you comment on the latest interviews with Elon Musk about 2 degrees in relation to the circular economy?
Hmm. Um, I don't know how politically correct this is going to be, but one of the problems we have from technology is that anybody who works in technology always think the problem needs to be technology. So Elon Musk and you heard Bill Gates also talking about these things and building these great contraptions that's able to go ahead and suck out CO2 from the atmosphere, and that is actually going to go ahead and solve our problem. But there are some other issues that we need to go ahead and look at, and these are all historical. And I'm going back to the Industrial Revolution. And of course, if we go back to England in the 1850s or London, Manchester, they were mainly the cities that we're concentrating on. The pollution in those cities was horrendous, that it must have been really terrible to have lived in those cities. And people started uproaring and putting together an uproar, and they say, how can we go ahead and live with that? And you know what the people said back there? The people in power said, we're getting better with technology. So that means that it's always going to improve, and we're going to need less material to actually go ahead and accomplish the same goal. And there was an economist by the name of Jevon who went ahead and put together his theory, and it was called Jevon's paradox. And what Jevon says, and I think you can totally relate to this one, the more we the more we save, the more we use. Bandwidth is a great example. We keep coming up with applications where we don't need as much bandwidth, but of course bandwidth goes through the roof. If we go ahead and say, oh, we're going to build roads so that it's much more efficient for people to get from A to B, you know what it means? People drive more. So when Elon Musk comes with these ideas that we're going to go ahead and take CO2 out of the air, then I really raise the question, are we really solving the problem, or are we putting another Band-Aid on it? And there's only historical evidence to go ahead and prove that this alone is not going to solve our problem. It's human behavior, and it's what we are actually demanding, and this is what we need to change. Technology might help us, but it's not going to solve the solution. And with that, Elon Musk can put it in his pipe and smoke it.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, I'm glad we're recording this. You can go
Amen.
ahead and play it to Elon Musk.
Amen, I see. Amen.
Yeah.
I've got another question from Abdul Salam, but I think I already heard a kind of answer. And he's questioning if the circular economy culture is only in Europe, or can it be in MENA as well?
Yeah, I think that it can and should be everywhere. And I don't think that this is a European phenomena. And I would even go ahead and argue that there are certain parts of the world that do a lot better job of it. Let me give you an example. Especially those areas that do not necessarily have the luxury that we have. In other words, so we don't have to worry about electricity. We don't need to worry about we don't have to worry about electricity spikes so that ruins our tools. We don't have to worry about clean water. We don't need to worry about having roads. Don't even talk about internet. Because individuals are forced to be very inventive and be very frugal, they are able to come up with much better solutions. And I would argue that the Europeans, and don't even talk about the Americans, can learn a lot in actually going ahead and exploring areas in the global south where they're being actually much more efficient with resources. And we should get off our high horse and saying that we're doing such a great job on circularity. I'm just going to go ahead and take some figures that I know from Austria, where Austria is actually one of the leaders when it comes to circular economy. You know how much of the material that we're actually saving of that 100% of waste? We're only recapturing maybe 10%. That means there is 90% more that was being wasted throughout this entire process. So I don't think any Europeans can go ahead and say how great we are.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know the figures for Belgium, Christoph. Sorry.
Yeah.
I
I
probably
do.
don't want to know, right?
Yeah, Tejas is also saying, like, what would you say from your experience? That's the most important, of course. I really would thank you for your full conversation, for your inspiring, and I would like to share my screen again.
Okay. I was just leaving a closing message from my end.
Okay, free
In
nature.
nature.
That's it. Okay, let's see. So we would like to thank you very much, Michael, for this inspiring session, full with new insights. The presentation slides, they will be sent out afterwards. So that's something which is coming up. We would like to offer you, Michael, in name of the IIBA Brussels chapter, this certificate of appreciations for having this session together with us.
Thank you. This will replace the CBAP that
Yeah,
just lapsed in December. Okay.
yeah. So furthermore, we would like to know, what do you think of this webinar? You can scan the QR code or give your feedback at www.menti.com/2. So wait, I'm going to put that one in the chat for a moment. So then you can give us any comments on this one.
Mm-hmm. Hey,
Thank
Christoph,
you.
would there
Yes.
be any chance that I might be able to show one last slide and then we can go back to the Menti? Is that okay for you?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Okay, good. There is, and this was the one I was talking about. Let's go here. Oops, sorry. I'd for those that I might have whet your appetite tied to circularity and BA work, I'll be holding a live stream on Monday, the 29th at 11 o'clock Central European time, and it will be concentrating on technology and circular supply chains. And I'll give you a quick explanation of some of the things that we will be covering. I have a company here in Austria that's working with machine learning and robotics to actually go ahead and separate the waste before it goes to the landfill. And I have someone who will be talking about digital twins. So how do we actually go ahead and create digital replicas of those things that we're actually producing with the intention of changing customer behavior at the point of sale? So if you're informed individual, that you can make sure that you're buying sustainably. And then I'll have somebody talking about digital identity and how that actually goes ahead and plays a role within the circular supply chain. So that will be on the 29th, this coming Monday at 11 o'clock. And please feel free, if you're on LinkedIn, you can look up Circular Experience and go ahead and register for that. And if you found any interest in that, what I was covering today, I think you might find a couple tidbits there. And I end that call to action there. Give you back the screen, Christoph. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. I have a question here to share the link in the chat, if you can, in a moment.
Yeah.
I will start sharing my
Yeah, you
screen
share your
again,
screen. I'll go
and
ahead
then
and dig up the link.
you
Okay,
can
great.
put a link there.
Sure, okay.
Okay, so before we want to close up this for tonight, so the IIBA Brussels chapter is currently hatching an egg. So we are hatching on something, and the goal will be to find us before Easter. We are holding a virtual Belgian cafes every Friday noon, where everyone's always welcome, and most of us are bound by IIBA. So have a look and looking for these X if you want to find out more. Coming up, so besides the weekly online BA Cafe, we have the informal chat always at lunchtime, Central European time. The next event that we have planned is the ECBA certification changes for 2021, which are starting as of the 1st of March. And there we have Deirdre, who will give us additional tips and resources, handouts, offers, and so much more. By the end of May, we will be inviting Trent Leopold, who will deep dive into the agile analysis and give some specific techniques into this agile analysis. That would be it for tonight. Thank you for attending our webinar, and do feel free to give us your feedback and your insights. In case you have any further questions, you can, of course, send them to us, and we will forward them to Michael, who would be happy to answer them.